Good afternoon, and welcome to another week of Menu Combat. This is a podcast for JRPG fans who love to pause and customize their party. And this week we have Johnathan Cloud here, an MC, producer, and game developer who's super into JRPGs, even more than me. He's going to be putting us on game today. Uh, I want him to say hello, introduce yourself a little bit to the people.
What's up? What's going on, y'all?
No doubt, no doubt. And so this is a special interview. Instead of our usual triple triad of what I've been grinding on, what I've been reflecting on, and what the music is, we're mainly going to be unpacking a series that I know very little about. So I'm going to do the little bit setup, and then I'm going to throw it over to Jonathan to kind of talk to us about specifically the Saga series. So the little I know is that Saga started in 1990 on the Game Boy, and it originally has Akitoshi Kawazu, and he was a part of the Final Fantasy II team. And so some of the kind of history of the unorthodox black sheep vibes of 2 gets reintroduced into an entire Square Enix series, and that's how I'll start us off. So to start us off, give us the 30-second pitch of Saga. Like, what would you tell to folks like me who just know that little blurb?
Honestly, that's where I was gonna go with it. That it
Okay.
has roots in Final Fantasy, so it's got kind of the same DNA, and that anyone who's played those early games should definitely at least try it out. It ended up becoming its own thing, but ultimately it's got the same roots. So there's definitely something, even though you're not gonna like all of them. They're all so different,
Right.
but there's something to be found in there for sure for any Final Fantasy fan.
No doubt. And so how did you get into the series? Like, what's your story to fall in love with the series?
Yeah, actually, so it was just I had no knowledge of Saga or anything like that. So I just got it by chance because that's growing up in the is a different time where it's just kind of like you're in EV games or you're in the game
Hmm.
section of a grocery store and you just see something like, oh, this looks cool. Let me try this out. And that's pretty much what it was. I think it was I believe it was Target. I was in Target and I was a big RPG fan then anyways.
Right.
So I saw that, I looked at the back and I thought it was cool how they had the and this is probably one of my favorite aspects of this game. So the first game I got was Saga Frontier
Saga Frontier.
2, Saga Frontier 2.
Okay.
And yeah, you read the back, that's how it was with physicals. You read the back and they had this interesting that I've never seen before. They had an interesting art style where it was pixel art combined with watercolor paintings.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, so I was very like, huh, this looks good. And yeah, I just like the whole, what I read about it, and so I picked that up. I think it was like $20. So, and that was I want to say like 2004 or 5, something like that.
Okay.
And yeah, I ended up getting that, and I like fell in love with that game, and that's where I started. I ended up getting the first one some years later,
Right.
and uh I mean, I have thoughts on the first one. It's not the same. It's nowhere near the same type of game.
Hmm.
That's the thing about Saga as a whole. They share the Saga name, but they're so different. Even the Saga Frontier games or even the Romancing Saga games, they're all so singular.
Interesting. So it keeps that element of Final Fantasy where almost everything is its own unique thing, doing something very drastically different mechanically or stylistically.
Yeah, but maybe even more so
Hmm.
differently. But the one thing though is it is generally the same type of gameplay and it
Okay.
had generally the same elements. I mean, the newer ones have kind of changed a few things here and there, but it's pretty much all the same as far as like linearity and
Okay. And so for folks who have only heard about the series in passing,
Mhm.
what would you say are like some of the misconceptions that folks have from the outside looking in?
That it's pretty much chaos because I've seen a lot of people say they're not really like into the games because they just dump you into a world and don't really like guide you or give you any story whatsoever, and it's just a very open scenario. And um a, a few of them are like that,
Okay.
but I wouldn't say like Saga Frontier 2, for example. Um that is probably the most story based and linear that you're going to get in the entire series, which
Okay.
is probably why it's the one that I'd recommend most to people because it has elements of the entire series, but it's also very streamlined.
Right.
So I think that's a big misconception that it's like complete chaos and they just dump you in it and you just do whatever. And yeah, I mean, to different degrees.
Right. And so I guess you talked about the gameplay being a key consistent. Like, so what are, if you were to define Saga by its like core mechanics or core ideas, what would you say those features or elements are? But even though things change a lot, like these will kind of show up in these ways.
Yeah, two things are I would say the weapon point system. Um, I'm not sure exactly how many off the top of the head of the games that have it, but the weapon system is kind of like they give you a point system for each weapon that you have, and it breaks after a certain amount of
Oh,
usage, and so you have to find new ones, and sometimes you can equip multiple weapons, and there's kind of like not really a class system
oh,
where it's like in Final Fantasy you would have Cloud, he could only equip swords, or Barrett, he could only equip guns. um this one you can kind of equip anything,
oh,
but there's also a unique aspect to that because the more you the more you use a particular weapon, you unlock skills, which is a thing that they call the glimmer feature.
okay.
And yeah, there's not really a level system either. There's
Oh,
not levels. There's not a level system. It's like a skill based system. And the more you use a certain weapon, like you can use martial arts, you can use
right.
staff. The more you use a certain weapon, the more experience you gain with that weapon,
And
and
then
the more
that increases.
skills. Yeah, the more skills
Huh.
you get with that weapon, and they come randomly. So you can just be hitting somebody with a regular attack, and you'll get the glimmer, and you'll unlock a new skill like out of nowhere, and they'll use it right in that moment, which is pretty cool.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So you can never make the same build twice, like on multiple playthroughs, then, from what you're describing. Is that fair to say?
Um. Yeah. It's pretty. Yeah. If you so for example, if you're using Gustav, and I'm using Saga Frontier 2 as an example.
Right.
If you're using Gustav and you're using like pretty much only staffs, like you can get a whole bunch of. So this is another thing. Once you unlock a skill with a certain character,
Right.
you can carry that skill over to other characters.
Oh,
It's kind of like it unlocks that skill for the entire game. It's not like just it unlocks it just for that character,
oh, so it's
which
like a
is a pretty
party,
cool thing too.
it's a party-wide skill.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So there's a lot of cool things. They can kind of throw you off if you don't really like go into it knowing what.
Right.
Because I didn't when I first played that game, I didn't know anything about that, and I was just attacking, and I would get hit with the. It's like a light bulb that comes over your head,
Right.
and yeah, it's a random skill that comes out of nowhere, and there's no like quantification for it. It just comes out of nowhere, and I think that's pretty cool, and it's interesting, and it definitely makes you you can switch it up. Like you can use different weapons and try different skills out, and it has a nice variety to it.
Is there, in addition to that, like core mechanic of building off a skill system and no leveling up in that way, is there anything else that you'd say kind of carries over throughout all of the Saga games?
Um, Multiple characters. Like it's very there's not really that's the thing, there's not really a main character in any of the games either.
Oh,
It's very like um in a lot of them it's a very like you pick the character that you start out with and then you
right.
finish the route that they have. It's so what I was gonna bring up later is it's very much like Octopath Traveler. Octopath
Oh,
Traveler pulls a lot of that from that. And I think I'm not exactly sure when Live Alive came out, but
right. That's a
I'm
lot.
not sure if you're familiar with that.
Yeah, that's like mid 90s and then got re-released recently.
Yeah, I believe Live Alive pulled from that as well. So
Okay. So yeah, you got to like that question about like its legacy going forward, and I guess
yeah,
we'll come back a little bit to that. I think given what you've described about the series where it is very open, right? Like it feels like that's kind of you the phrase that you said or you didn't like was chaos. Would you feel fine if I used the word open? Like, is that a better way to describe the series, you'd say?
it's very like non-linear.
Non-linear. Okay.
That's yeah.
Yeah. What do you think has made this be very consistent in Square Enix's catalog? Because I was looking through, you have the Game Boy games, the Super Nintendo games, the PlayStation 1 games. There's a little bit of break, I think, because you have something show up on PlayStation 2. You have a break a little bit in the PS3, but
Mhm.
even going into like early Switch, it would be the ones that gets the remasters quicker than any of the other Square series. There seems to be a deep affection for the series from Square in a way that
Yeah,
quote unquote their most important titles don't always get.
yeah.
And I'm curious, why do you think that is?
I remember reading somewhere that it's really a thing of the people there,
Mm,
the people involved in the Saga project. They just they really care about it. It's not a thing of sales because if that was the case, Unlimited Saga would have buried that entire series because that was not received well. I'm not sure if you've heard about that, but that's like a legendarily bad game.
I don't know much, but it is thinking about your story about like cool box art. I remember going into a video game store and I saw the Unlimited Saga box art. I'm like, this must be good. And when I searched it online, I was like, people are like, no, this is not want to buy.
Yeah, I got it for 2.99 in EB Games,
Yeah,
and I just got it. Just off the strength of Saga Frontier 2,
right, right.
and it was the one thing I will say is the soundtrack is incredible,
Okay,
but the soundtrack is handled by the same person who did Saga Frontier 2 and Saga Frontier 1. I believe one as well, but yeah, it was handled by the same group of people. So the music was phenomenal, but it was just it was held back by it's like everything that they had in a Saga game, all the things that they based the series off of,
right.
they just did it incorrectly. So it just and it
Mm.
was already and that's the thing, it was already like a very divisive system that they had set up. So it's like they didn't even do that right, and that's
That
a recipe for disaster.
right. Like I guess for a game like that, their margins for error are so slim.
Yeah.
That makes sense. And so you've talked about that, and so you've mentioned Saga Frontiers too. In addition to that game, what are the other games you'd recommend for folks like me who have never tried the series? Especially, I'll say for me, I've always looked at the Romancing Saga series with like some like, oh, is this what I should try in between catching up on the Super Nintendo art classic JRPGs?
I would say definitely Saga Frontier 1
Mhm.
as well because that's the most widely available right now. and
Okay.
and out of the ones that are widely like, there's a few like there's the Romancing Saga 2 and Romancing Saga, and there's a few on and then there's the newer ones. There's a few on like iPhone and modern consoles. But out of those, I would definitely recommend Saga Frontier 1 the most.
Okay.
And if two was on everything, I would go with that. But yeah, one is on everything now, and I have that on my phone. And
Okay.
yeah, that would be the one I would recommend to go to. And then after that, I would say I'm not sure if I would say wait until the remake of Romancing Saga 2 or get the one that's already out, because the one that's already out is there's I mean there's nothing wrong with it.
Right. Uh, yeah, I mean that we're going to talk about that because every time I look at Romantic Saga 2 remake, I'm just like, that looks so great. But you're right. Like I've looked at the sprite art. The sprite art is one thing that we don't talk about with the Romantic Saga series. Like they hold up beautifully. Even going back to the original Game Boy sprites, I'm like, I when I think about party systems on the Game Boy, like you don't even get a lot of RPGs on the Game Boy that are able to have what it's four members in a party, like the
Yeah.
artwork, all of that. It's like, yeah, sometimes I even just from a technical standpoint, when I look at what the context is for Saga 1, it's like, oh, they did a lot here to build the groundwork. And so you've told me the ones that I should consider to play. What are some of the ones I should consider avoiding as my first touch? Like, is Minstrel Song
Uh,
one terrible? Like, what are the ones I got to dodge?
well, I mean, we already talked about it, but Unlimited Saga definitely is. That's one that, well, honestly, that's one I would say if you get curious,
Right,
try it out at some later point,
right.
because it's just interesting to play it and know the context. Um, Other than that, I'm not like a big fan of the newer ones. I've I try to stay I try to stay open-minded, and I try
Right,
to try them out regardless, just because just because I'm a fan of the series.
right.
But the newer ones, like, because I have Crimson, I forget what it's called.
Scarlet
Crimson.
Ambition.
Yeah. Scarlet Ambition. I have that on my Switch. Haven't really like dug too much into it. It wasn't hitting me like that. The new one, I played a little bit of the new one. I like that more,
That's
but
Emerald, right?
that, yeah. That I like that more, but the same thing, I haven't really delved too far into it. So it's like they just have a different, they just have such a different feel than, and it's not even a thing of it being
Yeah,
3D. It's not even a thing of that. Because Minstrel Saga or Minstrel Song
right,
is that's a decent one, and that was PlayStation 2.
right.
And
So what do you think has changed then in like Scarlet Ambitions and Emerald that's like giving you the different feel and vibe?
hmm, I feel like it's kind of like they're going more the direction of they're going like more the direction of like fantasy, as
Mhm.
far as like kind of like the abstracts, more of like probably like Saga Frontier 1 would be a good example. If you went to that, like there's multiple characters, but there's one character where it's like a robot. There's one character where it's a girl who gets falsely accused of murder of her husband and gets locked away. There's just stuff like that. It's very like abstract. And I feel like they started to go in that direction as opposed to Romancing Saga 2, 3, or Saga Frontier 2, where it's based around, it has fantasy mixed in it, but it's very based in like realism. Like
Mm.
you have to fight wars, like it's very like
Oh,
politics heavy, stuff like that. And so I feel like they went the extreme with like the fantasy element, and it's just kind of like it doesn't, I'm not gonna say it's not good, but it's
right.
It can be divisive. It can be divisive.
Right. It doesn't scratch that itch or like the I always say for stuff that's always a little bit more complex or out there, it's like it's always nice to have something that grounds you.
Yeah.
And so it sounds like they've kind of not let go of the grounding, but it's like it's not as grounded throughout.
Yeah. A good example would be Square going from Final Fantasy X to Final Fantasy 12.
Okay.
The complete different shift.
Right,
So
right.
that would be a good example.
Okay. That's a good example. So you mentioned earlier, but you mentioned Live Alive, you mentioned Octopath as games potentially influenced by the Saga series. Are there any other series or even just other mechanics that show up? Because the one thing that made me you started to make me wonder are games that build skills through weapons, thinking like going tactics or going triangle strategy or FF9, all systems in which if you keep the weapon equipped, you gain the actual ability, or you can store the ability to use for later. I don't know if you'd say those things are as directly connected, but I was thinking about it as another place where we might consider influence.
Hmm. Off the top of the head, those are kind of like the only two I can think of their direct influences.
Right.
Maybe possibly Triangle Strategy. Well, Triangle Strategy was more like that was like kind of pulled off of Octopath and like an expansion of that.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely anything with like multiple scenario, like multiple characters. I guess you could say I guess you could say Seiken Densetsu
It's three, right?
3. I guess you could say that because that was after Saga, and that's in the same stratosphere as
Mm,
because these are all people that were in the same stratosphere as each other.
right.
So that would probably there's probably something there. Um, definitely Live Alive. That's probably the heaviest
The heaviest one.
heaviest influence. Um, yeah, just anything that has multiple characters, multiple scenarios that all tie together, but more than two, because a lot of games have had the whole like
Right.
split paths, but when we're talking about like 7, 8 different characters,
Right. Like when it's
yeah,
a truly ensemble piece.
yeah.
That makes sense. And so one of the things that I wonder you can let me know is that do you think the modern JRPG audience is better equipped to appreciate Saga maybe than the older set of audience? Like, do you think the audience is now more primed to be more into Saga? I think in terms of like have our taste changed enough to like dive in?
Um, I think Square has a wider reach of. See, that's the thing. Those games were very
Right.
ahead of the time, and I don't think you could properly. It's like it's I don't know how you could properly market those types of games at the
Hmm.
time,
Right.
as far as like Saga Frontier and Romancing Saga. Um, I don't really know how you would properly market them and people would really take to them because to my knowledge, they didn't like do amazing numbers
Right.
sales wise. I'm not sure about now, but I would imagine there's more of an open mindedness. I know people like the whole retro, like they like the style, the sprite based style of
Mm.
art, pixel art. I know that's like coming back. That's coming back heavy, and there's been so many ideas and so many different approaches in RPGs since those came out that it's kind of like they're not that outlandish.
Right. Right. Like you could argue in the 90s, folks were figuring out understanding the genre, but we're kind of at that point now where we're like, oh, we understand, so we're open to more flexibility.
Yeah, like it's like we have RPGs that are like half RPG and half dating sim now. So
Right.
it's like, you know,
No doubt. If you were to give me, and I'll put them both together, like a favorite mechanical moment or a favorite character moment or a favorite even fight from the series that stands out to you? It's like this was so why I fell in love with the series.
Um, man, there was a lot of moments in Saga Frontier 2 that that really pushed me to really dive into the other games.
Right.
But I would say a lot of what Gustav the 13th, um, his man, I don't want to say without I don't want I want to try to say it without spoiling
Right, right,
anything,
right.
but there's the whole battle at Han Nova, which is he ends up acquiring a castle and you basically have to defend it from monsters.
Hmm.
And there's a like really important scene that the battle ends with. There's that. There's when there's when there's this group of three travelers and they go to hunt for treasure and they end up and this is after what I just described.
Right.
There's a like a fake Gustav
Oh.
because the real Gustav he disappears for lack of a better term. He disappears. Nobody knows what happened to him. So this guy comes along and impersonates him, and he ends up brainwashing these three travelers, and it's just a very interesting scene. And like he makes them his basically his knights.
Okay.
So it's very that's very interesting. But there's a lot of that game is very like lineage based. Like it's
Mm.
you start as a kid, like Gustav as a kid, like I believe he's like you start out as like 12 years old and you end up going all the way to like when he's like 40 something.
Oh, wow.
So it go you go through his whole life.
Oh.
And it's very like the character development of that game specifically is very very focused and very heavy and it very immersive.
No,
So yeah.
that's interesting. We don't often get that, but I've heard, is that similar to, because I think Romancing Saga 2 or 3, I heard has this idea of that you are always like a descendant of a particular character.
Yes. Yes. Romancing Saga 2. It's kind of like that, but it's not really.
Okay.
Um, I would say it's more like more along the lines of maybe closer to Dragon Quest
That's,
5.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, because you describe more story-oriented experiences. That's fascinating. I've not, you have made that game go up my list a lot through that description. Uh,
yeah.
I guess that's actually leads us into the remake. I'm curious, what did you think of the trailer for the Romancing Saga 2 remake? And as we talk about the series and as we talk to potential future folks, like as they potentially look at the remake as a game to buy, what are some of the
Yeah.
things to keep in mind or get ready to do or like to make their experience a much more a fun one?
Um, I would say it's definitely like first of all, if you play Dragon Quest 5, definitely play Romancing Saga 2. It's very like that's what I would emphasize, like the whole lineage
Right,
system. And it is very like you have a lot of there's a lot of like customization to as far as like routes you can take and stuff like that. I'm not sure what they've added. I'm sure they added a lot in the remake
right,
because the original already had a lot of content. So I would imagine they've added quite a bit to it because of this, because of the style they're going for.
right.
Um, I would just, I would, there's nothing that would, make me not recommend it. It's
All
the
right.
original is great, so
All right, so it's like we can go clean slate right into that for most of the audience. Okay.
Yeah, pretty much.
And so you made one reference because you now made me realize I've sampled the Unlimited Saga soundtrack. I realized the minute you said that,
Oh,
like, I've gone through that.
yeah, same here.
You are right. It's a magical soundtrack. I forgot about that. And so that leads into one of the other questions, which is like, especially when we're talking about Square Enix and music, they always kill it. How would
Yeah.
you rank the OSTs? Like, if you were to tell folks to go pull up their Spotify and go run the soundtrack, or just some rankings, or maybe you want to give me like your top five uh OSTs from the series, like how would you talk about that?
Hmm. I don't know if I could give a top five because I can give a top three.
Top three?
Um, Saga Frontier 2. I feel like I'm going on a lot about that game, but Saga Frontier 2 is the best soundtrack. Unlimited Saga has the second best. It's not that far though, honestly. It's not
Right.
that far. It's very close. And probably Saga Frontier 1. And then hmm, Romancing Saga 3 is pretty good.
Pretty good.
I would give that a 4. As far as anything else, everything else is kind of like equal. They fit the game, they fit the
Right.
vibe, and they get the job done. Um, I just think those four specifically, they they kind of pushed beyond just like fitting the mold
Hmm.
and to where it's like this is music that could stand on its own easily.
That,
So
that, that's it. That means there's more. I have to go listen to Saga Frontier soundtracks to go sample those in. Is basically what I'm that I appreciate your answer to that. And I guess is there one song from the series that you want to highlight, like put on like if we had to put like on a song JRPG Song Hall of Fame, is there one song you're like, that's the one that like we got to keep in mind if we ever do something like that?
um I would say the theme song for Saga Frontier 2, I
Is
don't I would honestly recommend the entire soundtrack.
right, right.
And I couldn't really, honestly, I would not pick any one song out of there because I would butcher the names because it's all German song titles.
Yes.
So, but yeah, that whole soundtrack is incredible. You could really pick anything out of there. And um, the composer for that is Masashi Hamauzu. I don't want to butcher that, but I believe that's it. Um, he's done some he's done some other stuff, but it's very like piano classical
Okay.
type of sound, but it it fits that game because of the whole
Right.
watercolor look to it, and it's a very like um whimsical but like sophisticated type of approach, and it's amazing.
All right. I'm gonna spend that tonight then. I'm gonna spend that tonight because that sounds if you're saying it matches that watercolor element, like that's
Yeah.
yeah, because I look at the box arts and like I'm thinking about that vibe. Okay, that is cool. Is there any last things you want to highlight about the Saga series, things that we didn't get to talk about? Or I guess the last thing I'll say is like, do you have much thoughts on the original Game Boy releases? Because you mainly seem to have talked about the console stuff. I don't know if you have a lot of feelings going back there or
Um, I don't I don't believe I tried. I don't believe I tried the like original ones.
Mhm, mhm.
So I gotta, pick those up at some point. But
Yeah,
yeah, it's mostly been like the Romancing Saga and after that
right.
that I've given a shot.
Okay, okay. And yeah, I think if there's nothing else to say, I want to just say thank you for making time today, man. You
Yeah,
put
of course, man.
you put me on to the music, you put me on to the games to check out. You told me to avoid Unlimited Saga. You did the job. And so I want to, if people want to find you online, where can they find you? Where can they support you?
You can follow me at John Cloud the first. one ST, not FIRST. Um, that's on Instagram, Twitter, probably other stuff that I'm
I think you're
not
on TikTok now.
remembering. Yes, I have a TikTok, First Life Composer on TikTok.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's pretty much it. I have a website, firstlifelives.com, FIRST.
All right. All right.
So
And if you want to continue listening to other episodes of Menu Combat, you can find me at the Wolves Den 25 on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Or if you want to just go straight to the podcast, you can go to at Menu Combat on Instagram and Twitter. And we grateful for your time, grateful for today. And again, thank you for listening to Menu Combat, the podcast for those who love to pause and customize their party.